Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar takeaways from the 2024 PS Maturity Benchmark. My name is Charles Gustine, brand evangelist at Kantata, and I'm very excited to present today alongside our guest speaker, Dave Hofferberth, Managing Director of Service Performance Insight. We're going to be previewing some key findings from the upcoming 2024 edition of the annual SPI Professional Services Maturity Benchmark, which is coming very soon. Before we do begin, a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and a copy of the webinar is going to be emailed to you in the coming days. We do encourage you to submit any questions that you may have for Dave or I by utilizing the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. We will try to answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion of today's webinar as time allows. So with that, let's get started. Before I hand over to Dave to present the findings from the benchmark, which is going to take up the lion's share of our agenda today, I want to talk for a little bit about what Kantata is seeing. As a technology supplier that has a really singular focus on the professional services vertical, we're always trying to understand the intricacies of and priorities for leaders running professional services businesses, right? Which, it runs the gamut. And Dave will, the demographics of the PS maturity benchmark speak to this, right? From agencies to software companies with embedded services divisions to IT services firms, large and small. But what unites all of those businesses and what animates professional services is that this is fundamentally people-powered businesses that through which success is the medium of success is client-facing, revenue-generating work delivered by experts, skilled experts. And that really ultimately requires a really tricky balancing act, right? We use the benchmark at Kantata as an invaluable tool to help understand how the industry or industries are evolving. But when we do research of our own, we find data that dovetails really well with a lot of the key findings of the benchmark. And one of the things that we did recently is ask, what are your top priorities for the coming year to professional services leaders? And unsurprisingly, we found that it's not just maximizing profit, right, as a high priority, although 85% of business leaders said that that was a really high priority for them, but also growing and retaining your workforce is a high priority, and creating loyal clients is a high priority. And those are all well and good, but those aren't always complementary goals, right? Sometimes every decision has the chance to tip the scales one way or another. And sometimes a decision that protects margin isn't always a decision that protects the stress level of your workforce or that protects the satisfaction of a client. Sometimes decisions that we make happen to be a positive influence on all three. And we know that this is challenging, right? We know that business leaders are experiencing these destabilizing challenges. And if anything, through 2023, as Dave will talk about, those destabilizing challenges have almost been exacerbated, gotten a little worse after a 2022 that was a bit of a rebound year from a few years of destabilization. 2023 was kind of a return to a lot more delicate walking along that tightrope. And we know that the majority of services businesses are finding it very challenging to retain their clients, 53% experiencing poor retention of clients, finding it very challenging to retain their employees. And I know that we've sort of left the technical auspices of the Great Resignation behind, but that hasn't made it any harder to hold on to your skilled workforce. And Dave is going to share some really interesting data about how much of an impact being able to hold on to tenured employees has on some key performance indicators. And of course, maximizing profit, and 55% saying they're experiencing lower than expected profits. And as I said, every decision across every project, every client has the potential to knock this out of balance. And we know that, this is all being done across a pretty complex and unique services delivery lifecycle that runs the game, quote to cash, right? And the work that that SPI does when it's looking into both across its pillars, right? There are 5 pillars in the SPI benchmark Dave is going to talk about. And there's also, I think it's 5 business applications you look at, right? It's across that entire quote to cash life cycle that helps businesses go from conceptualizing what work they're even going to deliver to gathering the revenue from that work that they've delivered, from selling to resourcing to delivering and billing, and of course analyzing on top of that. And the trick is like these things don't happen in isolation, right? There's a complex orchestration to all of this where you're resourcing at the same time that you're selling. You can't wait until you've signed a contract to then think about, well, who are we going to put on this assignment? Do we have the right people for this? You're resourcing while you're delivering, right? You're always adjusting that resourcing plan and honestly the plan for the project as delivery is progressing, and you're resourcing and you're billing while you're delivering. And while all of that is going on, and I think that what we'll see throughout this webinar is good things come in fives, right? Five pillars, five parts of the plan to profit process, and here five aspects of the services delivery lifecycle. You're always analyzing what's happening on one project is always feeding updates to your overarching analysis, and your overarching analysis should be dictating the decisions that you make on a single project, because of course you're never just running one project. You're running a complex portfolio of projects across a lot of different clients and service lines. And so that's kind of what we're keeping in mind as we're thinking about the data that Dave is going to present today of what businesses in the professional services industry are experiencing, how these trends are evolving over time, and what are the difference makers that are helping some businesses navigate this life cycle better than others, right? Higher performance than others. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dave, and I'll chime in occasionally as we revisit some of these themes. But I'm really excited to see, what's under the hood with the upcoming benchmark data, Dave.
Again, we just finished the 2024 Professional Services Maturity Benchmark. It's our 17th annual benchmark survey. So this has got a lot of viewers have looked at this over the past 17 years. A little bit about SPI. We're a firm dedicated to researching the professional services market. Our goal is to help organizations like yours improve both productivity and profit. Behind that thinking is our professional services maturity model, which I'll get into in a couple minutes. And that really helps us help you better understand where you should start your performance improvement initiatives. This benchmark's been used by over 50,000 PSOs over the past 17 years. It's definitely got some traction. We were mentioned in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, and I'm real excited to get this one out to everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the benchmark. Then I'm going to go into some of the market trends and challenges we saw as a result of the survey-based research we did. Then get into what we call the plan to profit. Again, as Charles said, there's five real steps within that, five processes, tend to be five different department heads running and so forth. And then why firms are using professional services automation solutions. And if you don't know what those are, I hope you do, because I think next month will be my 25th year after I published the first report. So it's been a long time covering this market, and I'm always excited to talk about it. And then we'll wrap up and take Q&A. So the first thing is the professional services maturity benchmark. We built this 17 years ago, and we said PSOs like yours are built on five core pillars. The first one being leadership. It's how you communicate. It's how you lead. It's how when things go wrong, how flexible is management and so forth. Probably one of the most important pillars. They're all important, but leadership that's where everything starts, and you've got to have great leadership to have a great firm. Second is client relationships. That's your marketing and sales and partnering to deliver services. Very important. It's fed off leadership in terms of what the strategy is, and therefore what are we going to sell. And then the third pillar, the central pillar, is talent. Every industry talent is important, but in our industry, it is the most important by a long shot. I mean, this is how we make money, people. The fourth pillar is what we call service execution, and that's really the delivery of services. That's where you make money in professional services. That's the manufacturing arm of a service organization. And then finally, finance and operation. That's how you collect the money, better run your business to make sure everything is successful and so forth. With that, we have five pillars of performance, very similar to the capability maturity model. Level one is what we call heroic, and that's when your firm doesn't necessarily have processes in place. Everyone's working hard to meet the needs of the client. Everyone's selling, everyone's delivering. You're doing the same project 5 times, 5 different ways. It's not efficient, but the goal, of course, is client satisfaction and margin in that. So as firms begin to what we call mature, performance mature, they develop standard business practices. They align individuals with specific talents at specific costs to do the work. They invest in training to get everybody, working harder, better, more efficient. And then really those last two levels, 4 and 5, which we consider about 20% of the organizations we survey every year those are the organizations that are working extremely well. They're well-oiled machines. And when you get to that level 5, those are organizations not only that are operating well, they're really looking ahead, way ahead, so that they're always planning to achieve the benefits going forward. Great organizations, and I'll get into that here in a minute. And so the model that we built 17 years ago, it really basically tells you something you already knew, but we try to quantify it because at the end of the day, people want to understand how good is this? How important is this to do this? And so, leaderships, they set the strategy, they communicate with everyone else. With that information, sales and marketing develop campaigns, develop service packages, develop a lot of different things to sell to client organizations. With that information, of course, then HR knows the type of people, the type of skills, maybe geographic regions. Obviously, cost comes into play here so that they can hire to ensure the organization runs well. And then, of course, you've taken all that and then you move into delivering services, creating schedules, managing your resources, delivering on time, on budget, collecting all of the information associated with it to better do it the next time. And of course, if you do that well, you drive client satisfaction, you drive margin, you drive growth within the organization, and ultimately you drive profit. I always like to talk about margin first before profit because two companies can make the same margin, but one may be investing in new geographic regions and new services, and the other may just be paying the profit out to the stakeholders. Again, if you do a good job, it doesn't matter. So what's important here then is, and again, people ask, okay, this is great. Yeah, everybody has to work together. But what we find in this is that these organizations operating at the 5 different levels, you can see how much better they are. I'm going to get into the first yellow line on growth. Last year was a very difficult year in growth. I'll show that here in another slide or two. That was a problem for professional services globally. I'll show you different markets had different problems with it. And profitability wasn't hurt too bad last year. And again, we all know about interest rates. We all know about inflation, and I'll talk a little more about AI here in a few minutes too. But what I would say when we're done with this webinar is to look at these numbers. And again, these are just 8 or 9 of the 150 plus that we tabulate, and we've got them all across all levels to help you figure out where you fit in here. If you don't know, that's a problem to begin with. But if you do understand, here's what we grew at, here's what our deal pipeline is, and so forth, you can better understand at a high level where you might want to start your performance improvement initiatives. So again, just looking at that will help. And Charles, one thing I really wanted to show you on this slide is I think you're always interested in how the organizations work together that top little gear slide that I had.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And it kind of it dovetails with the graphic I showed earlier about the services delivery life cycle, but extrapolated out across the KPIs. And I think when we talk with our customers who are we're doing case studies with them, right? We're interviewing them about the success they've had using our software. What it keeps coming back to, a talking point that keeps coming up over and over again is our forecasts are so much more accurate. We can see so much further into the future from like 3 weeks to 6 months in order to confidently make decisions. And right, that's the secret sauce, right? Like every business is trying to figure out how they understand what they will need to do well enough to make proactive decisions that get them there. And in point of fact, like our customers are not successful in that because we've unlocked some secret formula to calculating forecasts, right? What it is that everything across these different KPIs, these different pillars, the different phases of the services life cycle is connected and ultimately drives accurate forecasts. If your timesheet compliance is not good, your forecasts will not be good. If your ability to estimate proposals for projects is consistently inaccurate, your forecast will definitely not be good. And that runs the gamut across selling, across staffing, and not understanding your true capacity for your organization across delivery. And so those things feed what ultimately becomes the breeding ground for success, which is, I might bring it up later, this idea of like a living plan for your business, right? Not what you thought you were going to do at the beginning of the year when you set your revenue goals, but based on what we currently know in real time, what is our business going to do? What decisions do we need to make right now?
Yeah, yeah, Charles, we're going to get into that because I can assure you again what I'm fortunate with, after doing this for 17 years is and I think again 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I didn't appreciate the importance of planning. I looked at it as okay, it's November, let's plan for next year. Oh, we got a plan. Everybody go out and work. How critical it is to manage that. And we've got a couple slides on that coming up later that will just highlight how important it is. So now I want to get into a couple of the market trends and challenges. And like I said earlier, you know, I gave you overall professional services KPIs for the whole market. But as we all know, every market operates differently. In 2023, you can see, for instance, that bubble on the far left is agencies. Agencies dominated during COVID. They were the big growers, big money makers. You wanted to be an agency back in 2020. But over time, it's been harder. And as the economy has recovered, companies are investing in other areas and they've suffered actually negative growth. It's the first time I've seen that in 17 years of surveying with any market. You always look at the IT consultancies and the management consultancies. They tend to be pretty strong year over year. They had a decent growth, although a little less than 10% for the management, but the profitability was lower than I was expecting. And so, you know, again, this is another one of these slides. Whatever market your organization is in, look at these numbers and say, okay, how do we compare to these? And that third number, just for the heck of it, is how many employees, the average firm size in each of the firms. That's why the bubbles are of different sizes. So and again, here's another slide with a few more KPIs looking at, and again, I like to show this every year. I like to put this in the report, and you'll see it when you get a chance to look at the report. Again, just to see the differences, the highs and lows of growth, profitability, employee attrition, billable utilization, and on-time delivery. Again, some of the most important KPIs that I believe your firm should be tracking. And you can see that just the numbers are different. The numbers, the ranges are different, in terms of all of these. And the goal here is for you and your organization to achieve the highest levels you possibly can, especially compared to your vertical market. I wouldn't be able to talk today if I didn't talk about AI, artificial intelligence. Let's face it, I was talking to someone the other day, And I said to them, I think I heard the term AI more in 2023 than I heard for the last 35 years put together. And I took a class in AI around 35 years ago. So, it's been talked about, but last year was the change. Not only our professional services firms, but every industry is jumping all over AI. Why talk about it here? Well, we're the people, professional services organizations. We're going to use AI, and I know companies like Kantata, they're building that, and they have been building that for a while into their solutions to make you more efficient. But let's face it, those of you that are in the right professional services market are going to have to be experts on AI going forward. And so we asked a couple questions about how important it is to our firm, how important it is to our clients going forward. And the results were actually fairly similar. It's going to be important. That's basically what these numbers say. I would have loved to have been over four, but that's okay. And then the next slide I thought was interesting because I always think it's interesting when I didn't expect the answer that was found. We asked, where is AI going to have its greatest impact in our pillars? And service execution, so that ability to plan the services, resource them, staff projects, manage projects, collect, the people that I interviewed in professional services believe that is where AI will have the greatest impact. I would have personally thought finance and ops and talent. But again, they're all important, and you can see that, almost half the people said service execution, and almost a quarter of the people said all pillars. And that's probably closer because we do expect it to have an impact everywhere. But there's no doubt um, that the service execution pillar that helps you deliver services efficiently and effectively is number one. And I know Charles saw this, and you had a bunch of comments on it, so
Right,
I'll
and
let you go.
efficiently and effectively is key. And right, obviously, professional services automation, right, has a long lineage at this point, and automation has been in the name since you defined the category, right? And the question has always been sort of like, what is it automating? Like, it's not automating professional services. The act of delivering professional services is a very human endeavor, and certainly, right, and I've seen this in conversations that I've had with agency leaders, right? Like, there are some things that AI is going to do that is going to supersede that human element, but certainly it isn't replacing necessarily the work of delivering those expert services, but what it's doing is making the act of processing all that information, right? I just think about the act of deciding who is the right person for a assignment out of a 1,500 person global resource pool, right? The permutations on that are countless, right? And this is something that's been in Kantata solutions for a while, right? The machine learning that enables you to crunch all those numbers, make an immediate recommendation. Here's the right team for this, right? But I think it goes beyond that because, I mean, the biggest killer of, I think, success on projects and success that inhibits financial performance and client success is decision making latency. It's the we need to wait until the weekly meeting to figure out how
Hmm.
to process this information and make a decision, as opposed to generative AI helping surface the right information before you could possibly see it, considering all the data that's available, and making a recommendation, right? What is the next course of action, right? Seeing the permutations, eliminating the bad permutations, and helping provide guidance. Like that's, I think I hope that's what, when a lot of these people are saying AI is going to have the greatest impact on service execution, that's what they're thinking about, is that ability to really set a course towards success with a lot less effort and sweat equity.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no doubt about it. And again, I've studied this market for 25 years now, and you know, it's complicated because projects are never perfect. You can plan a project from January 1st to February 29th, and I guarantee you about 50 things will go wrong, different changes And so what happens is all of a sudden you have resources that aren't available, or you may have resources that now are available. Who can do that? That is number crunching at its finest, millions of permutations, combinations of permutation. And so AI is, I think that's what people hope for. And I'm excited to see how Kantata and everybody else handles this. It's going to change everything for us. It's going to, I expect much better numbers in 5 years in terms of billable utilization, on time delivery, and all of that, because AI is going to help each consultant be more, excuse me, efficient and effective. So, real exciting stuff. I wanted to talk quick about four trends. And again, I was hoping to have some positive trends, but I just noticed that none of these, unfortunately, were positive. You can see revenue growth. Again, SPI, we like 10% on an annual basis. 2020, COVID, we know what happened there. um, you know, and then what happened, it bounced up the next year, but you can see it's gone down 2 consecutive years. And this is the lowest growth we've had since the financial crisis. So, and again, it's interest rates, it's inflation, it's all these geopolitical things that are going on. But the fact is that in 2024, PS executives are going to get back to driving growth, and they're going to have the sales and service delivery people working a lot more closely together. Likewise, billable utilization, it's usually always over 70%. We like it at 75% or more. It dropped down under 70% for the first time. I'm not, I maybe in forever. Again, you can blame a lot of the geopolitical and financial issues. So, we expect that this year interest rates have stabilized. Inflation has stabilized to a degree, and so we expect this year again to be a great year in professional services, especially with AI really starting to take off. Likewise, on-time delivery again went down. Again, we like it at least at 80%, and ideally 100, but nobody's perfect. And so again, it's a combination of those, and then you do everything, have problems everywhere. Of course, project margin is going to suffer. We tell firms like all of yours out there, 40% is a number you shoot for. Some firms in our survey hit 60%. So it's doable. It's just not easy. And again, we expect AI to help out, again, staffing, utilization, and so forth for firms to be more efficient. So again, we expect a good year in 2023, but I said that once in 2020, and or in 2019 I said that. In 2020 we saw what happened. So again, you've got to keep your eye on the bottom line. And so again, here's just another slide that kind of represents last year. Interesting, the size of projects went down by, what is that, $20,000 a project. That's a big decrease. And then utilization, again, I showed it. On time delivery, I showed it. Margin, I showed it. This is service. This is what you do for a living. You deliver services. You work on projects, hopefully have great utilization, on time delivery, and therefore great margins. And so it was concerning that last year we didn't. We just saw it go down even more. Again, I expect a better year this year. At least it seems, from what I'm hearing back from a lot of the people worldwide right now, that things are getting better. So, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Now I want to talk about what we call the plan to profit. And again, you'll notice it cuts across our four pillars: leadership through finance and operations. And you can see what we consider the events to occur in each. And they do follow, this kind of trend where there's planning done, sales takes what the plans are and then tries to sell against them. And obviously, talent managers have to hire the right people at the right price, train them, keep them, and so forth. And then, of course, you deliver. And this is what I've spent, most of my career on, is delivering projects on time, on budget, and making sure we've done a good job with it. So again, and then obviously you invoice and collect money. And I'll get back to this a little more on this slide in subsequent slides. So Charles and I earlier today were talking about this, 20 minutes ago. Um, that planning process is so important. And the way to tell how well you're doing, and when I say planning, it's not a November, December thing. That's just the beginning of an annual plan. That plan goes throughout the year. In 2020, the firms that had an active living plan did much better than those that set up a plan and then were hit with COVID and didn't know how to respond. So, this is very important. So we look at this, the companies that meet their annual revenue goals. You can see obviously if they're not meeting them, they're probably not growing revenue very well. So that makes sense. But you'll also notice, well, how did they do it? Well, they built up their deal pipelines. They won a lot more bids, therefore building backlog. And once they did that, and I can get into other things like discounting, but once they got that done, they delivered projects on time, on budget, because they were running better. They set up goals and they made sure they had the people to deliver to meet those goals, even when they changed, even when projects changed or technologies changed or whatever. This is so important to your organization to have that living plan. And I'll get into a little more about this later. Charles, you had a comment on this to me earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the idea of like a living, breathing plan, and that's something that one of our customers in particular, Esri, really talks very fluently about this idea of like a lot of businesses, especially when they don't have the tools to do it, they're just fundamentally running their business out like driving a car out of a rear view mirror, right? Rather than driving, which is not how you should drive a car.
No, no.
uh, rather than driving out of the windshield. And to some extent, right, that's like only understanding what you've done in order to understand what you should do. But also to some extent, right, there's a difference between goals and the plan that you actually use to dictate what you're going to do in the coming period, right? Because at a certain point, that plan becomes a dream plan, right? No plan. This is the saying of something along the lines like no plan survives like first contact with the enemy, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's true of every project. Every project is going to deviate from the plan. And when you look in aggregate of a business that runs based on projects, that means that, in aggregate, that plan is certainly going to deviate from plan. 2023 probably not as exacerbated as that was in 2020, but was a year that certainly had a lot of surprises in store. And so I think that those businesses that are really adept at sort of adapting their plans so that they're not operating off of a dream, but some version of reality, really have kind of the ingredients to success. And I think you see that with the data. I will say one other thing, and it's not borne out in the data this year, but we've talked about it in years past, that over 110% isn't always the best place to be.
Right.
If you perform 150% of your revenue goals, that's great and that you made a lot more money than you expected to, but that's not necessarily replicable because it does speak to a business that doesn't understand itself as much as the business that operated at 50% of its plan. And so that can potentially cause a lot of strain in some of those other areas. Like, is the way the resource pool being used sustainable to meet to continue to achieve that?
Yeah, and you're 100% correct. The nice thing is, and we didn't get into it today, that a lot of these firms do have that subcontractor pool of individuals. Usually 10 to 15% of services are delivered by your subcontractors. So that definitely helps. But as you said, when you start getting numbers over 110%, things are going to go wrong. Quality is going to suffer, and you'll have to pay for that in subsequent years because and again, that's why it's so important to plan and meet your goals, and that way happy clients, happy consultants. And I won't get into it too much, but margin is the same way. You plan revenue, you plan margin. you can see that the firms, again, what's interesting for me was the meeting margin, these companies all grew very well. So that was good. They built backlog, utilization, delivered on time and had more money per consultant and employee. And so again, very important. Those are the two things that at a high level you plan. Again, there's always things with talent and so forth, but we won't get into that today. Okay, and so we move on those two planning things I just showed, we get into pipeline. And we like a pipeline of over 3x, over 300%, as I like to say, because you're not going to win all the bids. At the beginning of every quarter, you want to have a big pipeline because you're going to close some of the business for this quarter, some of the business for next or next, and some of it you're not going to close at all. And you can see the organizations that really focus hard on sales. They just do a lot better growing revenue, having more in backlog and so forth. You can see these numbers are interesting, and I did want to highlight because it's always the whole on-site, off-site delivery. People are still asking a lot of questions about it, and here you can see that organizations that delivered more remotely did better in terms of this, and that's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. Billable utilization was interesting because it was only a 2% delta, which I was surprised because it's usually 5 to 7% on something like this. But again, 2% is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of money. Those organizations and so forth. So Charles, I knew you had a comment on this too.
Uh, well, actually, there's a question from the chat that's just pertinent to this slide, and then maybe
Okay.
we'll move on to the next one. When you say 3x, can you clarify 3x of what?
So in the quarter, you want to deliver $10 million of services. You ideally have $30 million in the pipeline because again, some of it's fluff, some of it will never get closed,
Hmm.
some of it will get closed, but it won't be starting till maybe next quarter, and then some of it will be for this quarter. So the pipeline is just step one.
Yeah.
You take pipeline, you win bids, and then you build backlog. And once you get to a sufficient backlog, you discount less. It just puts everybody at ease when you have a 50, 60, 70% backlog at the beginning of every quarter.
Mhm. Thanks for clarifying that.
Oh yeah. Here was a new question we asked this year, but I was really interested in these results. Consultant tenure. Um, I guess it was interesting just because when I think tenure, I think stability. I think that the individuals, the longer you've been with the firm, maybe the more you just know how to handle things better. Because let's face it, professional services is never easy, and so you can see that that those organizations with a more seasoned internal workforce, they want a lot more bids because they can talk the talk much better. They have lower attrition. I thought it was interesting the on-site delivery. And again, if you've been in a firm 10 years, you're probably more used to being on site. If you've been at a firm 2 years, you're probably more used to delivering services remotely. So this this will be something interesting we will track every year as we move, away from total on-site delivery or 90% on-site delivery to more of a 50-50 on-site delivery. So it's going to be very interesting. But again, as you might expect, the consultants that have been around longer, they just know how to handle the problems that others don't. And of course, it shows up at the bottom line in profitability. What do you
Yeah,
think
and
about that, Charles?
I love that we're tracking this now, and I know typically you've done this kind of like by attrition, right? And
Right.
obviously attrition's still a dimension of this, but
Hmm.
using this as this sort of crossing the Rubicon of over five versus under five, I think it speaks so powerfully to the notion of these as people power businesses that are fundamentally run by these sort of seasoned experts, and that like, look, we know the cost of replacing one of those experts is prohibitive, but it is not just the cost of recruiting someone new, or even the cost of the downtime from someone being onboarded where they're not billable, but the cascading impacts that come from losing one of those tenured, seasoned experts across the projects that get delayed, the clients that are dissatisfied, and that fundamental loss of knowledge. And I think one of the things to think about when it comes to like retaining the workforce and monitoring kind of the health of of your employees is understanding like where are those people that have been there for 9 years, 13 years, where have they become like almost like a single point of failure? Because we do have a tendency to make those people a single point of failure where A, that compounds so much stress on them that they burn out and they have to go look somewhere else. And B, they're a single point of failure. When they leave, things start falling apart. Those are the places to look for optimization and maturity.
Yeah, and consultancies tend not to have a large percentage of the workforce at 20 years. Maybe back when I was young, people stayed at companies 20, 30, 40 years. It's definitely the market, the world has changed. And so, you're hiring a consultancy because of that expertise.
Mhm.
And so somebody who's been around a couple years doesn't have that level of expertise that somebody has been around 10 years. And so, the goal here is to keep your employees. And you're right, we do measure attrition, and I could have put that up here too, but I just found this so interesting. But you want to keep them, and you do that by number one, having happy clients. It makes a consultant's life a lot easier, and challenging them with new and exciting things. So it's an interesting KPI, and again, everyone can sit back and think about how their organization is run. Um, then we move on to deliver. And if you've ever heard me speak, I love talking about on-time delivery more than anything because your goal is to grow revenue, your goal is to make money. But if you don't have happy clients and happy consultants, none of that will happen. And that on-time delivery is one of the biggest drivers of both client and employee sat because when things are being done on time, on budget, um, everyone's happy because when it's not, what happens. Finger pointing, the consultants, and the consultants bear a brunt of it, whether it's their fault or the clients or someone else, in another area. So it's real important. And we like organizations to shoot for around at least 80% on time delivery. And that doesn't mean that projects can change. So you could change a project and the delivery date then gets moved out. If as long as it's an agreed upon time and cost with your client. If they ask for something, everyone has to agree. Okay, this is going to take an extra 3 weeks, and it's going to cost an extra $50,000. As long as we're all in agreement, we sign it. That's good. That's still on time delivery. It's when things start happening and you're not managing change or you're not getting to the right people, and it could be the client's fault, but nobody cares. They blame you. And so you can see the organizations that had over 80%. Well, first of all, they grew revenue faster because they finished projects and moved to the next one. They grew headcount about the same. That was kind of interesting to me. Attrition's much less because, again, when people quit, everything slows down. And billable utilization, again, I keep seeing that 2% number, but about that, and so forth. And again, profitability, I saw this because you are usually it's more, well, I do have margin in here too. Margin's much higher, profitability is much higher. And again, at the end of the day, this is where you make your money. And I forget, Charles, you really wanted to talk about this because this is your bailiwick.
I mean, this aligns with I mean, obviously the data in the benchmark bears this out. Research that we've done bears this out. Like fundamentally, too few projects are meeting these core goals of like on time, on budget, to scope. And like, look, I mean, not to overuse like war metaphors, right? I think this is the battleground, right? Like these are the trenches. And when we were talking earlier about what AI is going to help us do, it's like those in the trenches, in the moment decisions where decision making latency is a killer. And project managers just fundamentally have to wear so many hats and serve so many masters to align all those different competing goals. And one of those is obviously the timeline of the project. And they're frequently asked to make decisions that benefit one thing at the expense of another. Maybe it's the timeline, maybe it's the budget, often without full visibility, right? Like what literally without the context they need to understand the impact of that decision that they're making. And I think and well, yeah, I know you'll talk about data visibility very soon, right? Like the first thing is giving them even the visibility to know the impact of the decision they're making. And then the horizon, which we talked about with AI, is actually eliminating all the noise, giving them the relevant data and giving them guidance on what decision to make.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, this is where you make money. This is what you really focus in on, hopefully, in your organization. And then finally, profit, plan to profit. Uh, we looked at these firms. Again, we think 15% is a fair number to shoot for every year. Organizations that, were under it versus over it. You can see it was interesting to me that the year over year change in PS revenue was the same. So in other words, I always think growing revenue means more profit, even a higher percentage, because people are working harder, more efficiently. But in this particular case, it was, it's a rounding error, basically 7.7 something. What is important here is you can see attrition is much less for the organizations that made money. So again, getting back to you know keeping people happy, and keeping people happy means delivering on time, on budget, so your clients are happy, using a standardized delivery methodology, increasing billable utilization, on time delivery. I mean, you could just see all of these KPIs, and they roll out to a decent bump in project margin. And again, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying for. When you deliver projects, it's not organizational profitability you're looking at. You're looking at, hey, I want to be successful. I want a good margin from this project. They can do the money what they wish. So I thought it was very interesting. So taking a step back, and again, we talk about this plan to profit process. Um, Covering information systems for all these years, there's benefits with automation and a lot of things, but a lot of it just has to do with increasing visibility across the organization. Um, do your employees, do your executives, do your managers, do your consultants have visibility into what's happening so that they can make those adjustments? And you can see all of these KPIs, and these are some of the most important key performance indicators that you can see how much better they are with organizations that have great visibility. It's great visibility is like great leadership. You can do so much more. And so, I ask you to look at all these KPIs because, again, these are some of the more important ones. Can you tell me what they are today? Or even at the end of this week, can you tell me what they are? Because if you're only doing this analysis once a year, you're missing the boat. So real important to look at these numbers and try to compare your organization to it. And do you have visibility across the organization? And again, here just getting back into some of the KPIs that again we track 150 plus that we quantify. Um, these are some that I hope every organization, someone or some people in every organization manages, because these are the ones that you can report on. These are the ones you're going to try to improve in a variety of ways. And so, how do you do that? And so I get into, again, what we call the plan to profit process cycle. I'll move my screen a little so I can see this. Um, what's interesting is that organizations that use professional services automation solutions, and I've been doing this for a long time. I've surveyed since the early 2000s on PSA. There's always these benefits, not only to the delivery. People think, oh, PSA is for delivering services. Well, that's where it started, no doubt about it. increasing billable utilization, increasing project margin. There's no doubt about it. It does that in spades every year. But what it really also does is executives use PSA to better understand where should we sell next year? Where should we, what are our most in-demand projects? What are our margins with these? So maybe the most popular project has low margins, and so you realize, hey, we've got to do something differently. Well, PSA is the only way you're going to figure that out. You're going to see the delivery, you're going to see the margins of every project, every type of project, every client, every consultant, to better run your business. So again, those organizations that use it to plan revenue and margin are just more efficient. Selling, again, TSA integrated with the CRM solution in your organization helps everyone, because these are both frontline groups that support clients, that are in front of the client every day. And so working to better understand what's selling, what we should be selling, what we shouldn't be selling, do we have the people to do it, is so critical. So PSA again helps you sell more efficiently. Obviously, the utilization numbers this year were incredible, from 71 with PSA to 64.6 without it. On a relative basis, that's about a 10% improvement. That's significant. And I threw the offsite hours in again. Consultants are going to still deliver a lot of hours offsite. That's not going to change. They may move up to 1,000 hours on site at some point, but offsite is the way to go if you can do it. And having the PSA solution there with them wherever they happen to be helps them better run their business. And so again, you can see things on project margins, incredible benefits there, and then profitability and revenue per employee. So again, the executive team that uses PSA for a planning app to go from planning to profit, they just have a tool that is more beneficial to help their organization grow and prosper. Charles, what do you think about this?
I mean, obviously, we see similar results on our end, and we see a lot of the context that people are coming from, and in some cases they're replacing analogous solutions. But research shows that in a lot of cases, so many component parts of this, so many of those gears you showed earlier, still live in spreadsheets, right? And I like to
Mhm.
think that the majority of the businesses, it's not all spreadsheets, right? Like there are applications that are covering some of these areas, but they are glued together with spreadsheets, right? It's a lot
Mhm.
of point solutions, something managing delivery, something managing staffing, something managing timesheets and expenses, a CRM and ERP, and the space between those is sort of held together with, chewing gum and paper cups, and that's basically spreadsheets. And I think that the vision, the heritage of PSA as it emerges into these sort of fully formed professional services cloud. I mentioned quote to cash earlier, but I really love the configuration of really it's plan to profit, right? Because it's not just quote to cash, it's building plans you can run your business by, and then executing against and realizing those plans, and ensuring that you have a technology stack with a sort of purpose built, truly vertical SaaS solution at the center of it that can understand and process all of these things accurately enough for you to be able to influence these metrics. And that takes more than what you can probably get by kind of stitching together those point solutions.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. And also think about how AI will impact this. As
100%.
you're building your plans, PSA will feed in to that to give everybody scenarios. What is the optimal sales plan, based on our resources, based on our bill rates, based on what we can sell and can't. I mean, there's so many things that will come into this, but it's still this data that's necessary. You can't. AI doesn't tell you what the best thing to do unless you feed it, and this
Garbage
is
in,
what you
garbage out. Yeah.
yeah, this is what you feed it. Yeah, you don't feed it with assumptions, you feed it with facts. And then there are some, assumptions on where the market's going and so forth. But this is pure fact. So it's going to be fascinating this year to see all the changes are made as a result of this.
All
And
right.
so,
Yep.
real
Yep.
quick, my last slide really is, last year was a tough year, tougher than we anticipated. And it's over. It's over. We got through, they quit raising rates, inflation settled down, AI, is this buzzword that some people don't know anything about. Now all of a sudden it's dominating the airwaves. That it's changing, but it's good. It's all good. Every department can work to improve. I just think PSA is part of how they'll do it. And again, we like benchmarking. We want you to benchmark. We want you to understand where you're doing well, where you're not doing well. That's the only way you can start to improve. And so you select those KPIs that are most beneficial to your organization, the ones that you really care about the most. But there are a lot of others that feed into those. It's all about levers, and then leverage your PSA and other tools to simplify the process and to become more efficient. So, with that, I will hand it back to Charles.
Just real quick before we get to
Yeah.
questions, we have had a few come in, right? Visit kantata.com/resources. You're going to be able to very soon access the SPI PS maturity benchmark for 2024 from there, as well as other great SPI research like the talent benchmark that SPI did last year, the PSA end user survey that was done in 2022, and a lot of other research that Kantata has commissioned from elsewhere, including the Forrester consulting report that I was citing data from earlier, and a really great new piece of research we did in partnership with S&P Global Market Intelligence about the macro technology shift that's impacting the professional services industry. So we have a lot of great insights there on our website for you to check out. And I do believe that probably you guys who are attending will be getting sent the benchmark anyway. But there's lots more riches to mine if you head to kantata.com/resources. Now, questions. We don't have a ton of time for questions. We have seen some come in. One I wanted to put in front of you, and this is probably a yes or no question, but maybe an idea for future benchmarks, if not. Regarding workforce, ooh, echo. Regarding workforce attrition, did you map this against the type of business ownership? Example, do employee-owned businesses demonstrate lower attrition?
No, no, we didn't because we don't ask that. You're right. It may be something we should do. Public, private, employee.
Another question we got about kind of how things are measured. I've always been curious about the definition of billable utilization on these reports. Does it include concessions on projects as well? So, for example, budget is 100 hours, but due to bad configuration by a consultant, you decide to give an additional 10 hours as a concession. Do these hours count towards billable utilization? I may be preempting your answer, right? I think one of the things is you try, as you're asking all these different organizations, to give them some sort of standard.
Mhm.
But obviously, every business comes into responding to the benchmark with their own definition of billable utilization.
Yeah, yeah, and we also look at hours worked because again, it's funny that everybody starts out with 20, 80 hours in a year. Well, if you're a consultant, I don't know any consultant that only works 20, 80 hours. I mean, or has that many hours, working hours. It's more like 2,500 or more. That's just the nature of our business, travel, and so forth. So I would say I wouldn't include it because utilization is billable utilization. So you're not billing those 10 hours on that project. And that it goes into our you'll people will look at the talent chapter on talent, and they'll see that organizations average a certain amount of non-billable project hours. We obviously would love that to be zero, um, but it is what it is, and so it hurts. It
Yeah, and I think
hurts.
you'd see some businesses put that into like a productive utilization, but not billable utilization bucket along things like, working on the bid team, right?
Sure.
Where it's like you're doing work that's contributing to the success of the business, but it is literally not billable. And so some businesses will measure, productive utilization separate from billable utilization. Um,
Yeah. No, and Charles, I mean, and again, we always get into this. What is the average utilization of my organization? Well, Again, more senior level people bill less hours
Mm,
because they're selling, they're hand holding,
yes,
they're supervising, and so they're not billing. So, your senior people are billing 500 hours a year, your junior level people are billing maybe 2,000 hours a year or more. And so, you just do the weighted average of those 100 people times 2,000 hours, and then how many billable hours out of that. That's kind of the way you should do it, but everybody does it differently.
absolutely.
I don't care how you do it, just be consistent.
Yes.
And then, understand, okay, are we getting better or are we getting worse, and why? And that's what we're trying to accomplish there.
100%. All right, we're at time. I want to thank everybody for joining us for the duration of this webinar, and I especially want to thank you, Dave, for joining us today and presenting the findings of the benchmark. And I, like everyone, like we're excited to crack the full thing open.
Yeah, it's a big one. So, well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.